An isolated world, far outside even the most remote corners of the galaxy. An endless ocean swept by violent storms. Yet, what this world and its inhabitants offered would set in motion the downfall of an order that had endured for millennia. Welcome to Kamino. Deep in wild space, even beyond the Outer Rim territories, a few lonely star systems drifted at the edge of intergalactic space. One of them was the Kamino system. The planet Kamino was the fifth of 12 planets in the system. Beneath its dense and stormy atmosphere lay a vast ocean that covered almost the entire surface, with the exception of a few small archipelagos. But this had not always been the case. For much of its recent history, the planet was covered by vast continents where diverse ecosystems supported a wide range of plants and animals. The dominant species were the Kaminoans, who built a highly advanced civilization. Several large cities with striking architecture served as centers of society, economy, and education. Like the capital, Durham City, most of them were carefully planned metropolises with efficient infrastructure, expansive parks, and monumental architecture that reflected the prosperity of that era. Around 19,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the planet's climate entered a phase of rapid warming. Even the advanced Kaminoans were surprised by the speed at which the planet changed. The planet's rapid climate shift could not be fully explained by off-world scientists. Many theories were proposed, but none were ever confirmed. And the Kaminoans themselves have remained silent on the matter. As a result of the warming atmosphere, the huge ice caps at the planet's poles began to melt. In an event known as the Great Flood, the planet's land masses disappeared hundreds of meters below the rising sea level within just 2 centuries. Almost all land-dwelling animals became extinct. And the dramatic dilution of seawater also posed a major challenge to life in the oceans. Since they had not yet developed hyperspace technology, leaving the planet to save their species was not an option for the Kaminoans. They were forced to abandon their cities and live on ever-shrinking stretches of land, which caused their numbers to decline significantly. Pushed to the brink of extinction, the Kaminoans took drastic measures that changed them forever, not only as a civilization, but also as a species. Faced with the fact that the world in which they had evolved was lost forever, they decided to take evolution into their own hands in order to adapt to the new environment. What began as a selective breeding program quickly turned toward genetic research and the development of advanced cloning technology. How much the Kaminoans' physical form may have changed over this time cannot be determined with certainty. They had large eyes that allowed them to see even in murky waters, and a slender build that appeared almost fragile but was well suited for movement in water. Overall, there was little evidence remaining to indicate that the Kaminoans ever lived predominantly on land. In time, the Kaminoans built new cities on stilts above the sea, anchored to the seabed where the highest mountain ranges had once stood. These platforms, shaped like mushroom caps, rarely retained features of the pre-flood architecture. The biggest of these cities, such as Timira City, were built around expansive cloning facilities and the infrastructure required to support them. Tipoca City, the capital of Kaminoan society, housed the central government and one of the planet's most advanced cloning and research centers. Faced with the planet's increasingly limited resources, Kaminoan culture became minimalistic and inward-looking. Little was known about their society, which was organized around a strict caste system dividing individuals among administrative tasks, skilled labor, and manual work. Caste membership appears to have been determined by eye color, reflecting specific genetic traits and aptitudes for assigned tasks. By assigning individuals to the roles their genetics deemed most suitable, this rigid arrangement was designed to ensure the survival of their species amid the stormy seas of their world. Even after the first scouts of the Galactic Republic had made contact, the Kaminoans remained distant from outsiders, earning a reputation as isolationists among the few who knew of their world. Eventually, economic pressures and the need to survive compelled them to offer their greatest asset to off-world customers, their advanced cloning technology. Although they regarded themselves as superior, looking down on even the most advanced species in the galaxy, the Kaminoans were wise enough to treat potential customers with courtesy and hospitality. By revealing only a carefully measured glimpse of their cloning abilities, they soon sparked enough interest to secure their first orders. The Kaminoans were neither particularly selective nor constrained by moral considerations when it came to the background of their customers or the fate of their product after delivery. Consequently, in addition to providing cheap labor for large corporations, they gradually began producing private security forces for organizations of sometimes questionable intent. Around the cloning complexes, the Kaminoans established complementary industries to develop and supply equipment, tools, and vehicles for the clones, always adapted to their intended tasks. Training rooms for simulations and educational facilities ensured the final product was fully prepared, both physically and mentally, to meet customer specifications. In the year 32 before the Battle of Yavin, what was likely the largest order in the planet's history came from an unexpected source. A Jedi Master, acting on behalf of the Galactic Republic, commissioned the creation of the largest clone army the galaxy had ever seen. But the unusual nature of the order went beyond who placed it. The Republic had not maintained its own armed forces since the dissolution of its military following the Rusan Reformation over 9 centuries earlier. The order called for several million human clones, most outfitted with standard genetic modifications, while some would be optimized for specialized missions and receive elite training. The down payment was handled by the intergalactic banking clan, an indirect method typical for secretive war preparations. Production of the first generation of soldiers began as soon as the genetic sample from a donor was collected. Ten years later, the first 200,000 clone troops were ready for action. They soon saw their first combat for the Republic at the Battle of Geonosis. The Separatists' crisis, which had troubled the galaxy for 2 years, had erupted into open war, a conflict that would become to be known as the Clone Wars. Following the clones' victory at Geonosis and the Republic's Supreme Chancellor's initiative to rebuild the military, the contract with the Kaminoans was expanded. Due to its remote location and the Kaminoans' isolationist culture, Kamino had largely been spared from conflict throughout its history. But with the outbreak of the Clone Wars, A conflict that would soon engulf much of the galaxy, this was about to change. Kamino had become the source of a steady stream of soldiers for one of the largest armies in Republic history, a fact that did not remain hidden from the enemy for long. Shortly after the Battle of Geonosis, the Separatists' droid army launched its first attack on Kamino, aiming to destroy the cloning facilities where the Republic's soldiers were being produced. Fortunately, the Republic had gathered intelligence about the impending attack and reinforced its defense fleet in time. Despite these preparations, the clone factory in Tipoca City was only narrowly saved after droid forces managed to land in the city. The Republic suffered heavy losses, but intense fighting on the ground and in orbit ultimately forced the Separatists to retreat. Aware of its vulnerability, the Republic permanently stationed a large defense fleet above Kamino and fortified the planet. Several outposts were established in neighboring systems to provide early warning of approaching enemy forces. Fearing espionage and sabotage, the Republic soon decided to seal Kamino almost entirely from the rest of the galaxy. As a key target in the war, it did not take long for the Separatists to launch another attack on Kamino. About a year after their first attempt to destroy the cloning facilities and disrupt Republic troop supply, the droid army struck again. A Separatist fleet entered orbit and engaged the defenses, but the assault was only a diversion. The ships were calculated losses. One by one they were destroyed and debris rained down on the planet. Hidden among the wreckage were camouflaged transports carrying battle droids and assault vehicles. Crashing into the sea with the debris, these units remained hidden in deep waters, awaiting the signal to begin the real attack. When a second wave of Separatist ships struck at Kamino's orbital defenses to divert the Republic's forces, the hidden droids rose from the waves and launched an assault on the main clone complex in Tipoca City. Although the defenses in orbit held, the attackers on the ground overwhelmed the surprised garrison and inflicted severe damage. After prolonged fighting, the intervention of several Jedi and the deployment of reserve units, clones who were still in training, prevented the destruction of the cloning facility. Only at great cost were the defenders able to regain control of Kamino's capital and drive back the Separatists' forces. A year later came the final major assault on Kamino during the Clone Wars. After allying with the Separatists, a Mandalorian force led by a renegade clone who had fled Kamino before the war launched a surprise attack. Drawing on their knowledge of the clone army's tactics and the layout of key facilities, the attackers advanced rapidly. Before they were finally repelled, they succeeded in destroying one of the cloning facilities, killing countless clones and research personnel. It was one of the most devastating strikes against Kamino. As a result, the Republic once again significantly increased its military presence on the planet. After 3 years of war, the Clone Wars ended in the year 19 before the Battle of Yavin. The Separatists were defeated, but the Republic, now transformed into the Galactic Empire, still required a vast army to impose its new order on the galaxy. Control over Kamino, already tightened in the final days of the conflict, became stricter still. Imperial commanders assumed direct authority over the administration of the cloning facilities and other key posts on the planet. For the Kaminoans, their world was transformed from a fortress into a prison, serving a single purpose: to provide the Empire with clone soldiers for its new Stormtrooper Corps. It didn't take long for some Kaminoan scientists to grow increasingly frustrated with the imperial rule and the oppressive control over their homeworld. In secret, they began breeding clone soldiers loyal to themselves rather than the Empire, building a private army to one day challenge their occupiers. 7 years after the Empire seized control of Kamino, Imperial forces uncovered the Kaminoan resistance plans just as its clone army was preparing to rise up and liberate the planet. In the ensuing battle, the rebel clones faced their stormtrooper brothers. Despite their efforts, the Kaminoan forces were outnumbered and defeated, and the resistance came to a brutal end with the execution of the scientists and clone engineers who had defied the Empire. This incident convinced the Empire that its reliance on Kaminoan clones was a vulnerability that could undermine the effectiveness of its military. Although production of new generations of clone troopers continued on Kamino, Imperial Command began seeking alternative cloning technologies, establishing facilities on other worlds and diversifying the recruitment of Imperial forces. Although the Empire succeeded in establishing alternative cloning facilities, many of them faced serious problems. Some projects were abandoned for technical reasons before they could even begin, while others produced entire battalions of unstable soldiers who succumbed to clone madness and proved unfit for combat. As a result, the proportion of Kaminoan clones declined only gradually in the years that followed, until Imperial Command concluded that recruiting from the wider population was more flexible and economical. This policy also allowed the Empire to exert pressure on individual worlds and discourage violent rebellion by enlisting soldiers from their own populations. From then on, clone production on Kamino steadily declined and the planet lost its former significance. Kamino remained under Imperial control. Hidden from the rest of the galaxy, Imperial scientists exploited Kaminoan knowledge and facilities to conduct experiments aimed at developing even more advanced cloning technologies. A year before the Battle of Yavin, they succeeded in creating a powerful, force-sensitive clone that was both healthy and stable, an achievement possible only through Kaminoan expertise, and one that most scientists elsewhere had believed impossible. However, the clone's immense powers made him difficult to control. Soon after his training began, he escaped Kamino, devastating parts of the Temira City cloning facility and wiping out most of the Imperial forces guarding him. Finding his way to the Rebel Alliance, he persuaded them to launch an attack on Kamino's cloning facilities. Unbeknownst to the rebels, the Empire had foreseen such a strike and had already reinforced the planet's orbital defenses to repel the attack. The battle started badly for the Rebel Alliance, as Imperial Star Destroyers opened fire on them as soon as they emerged from hyperspace. In addition, the Temira City clone complex was protected by a powerful deflector shield that made destruction from orbit impossible. In a desperate move, the rebels deliberately crashed one of their damaged capital ships into the shield and the city below. After the shield collapsed under the massive impact, the battle shifted to the surface. Rebel combat teams landed in Temira City to destroy the cloning facilities and other Imperial installations, but encountered fierce resistance. The battle spread throughout the city. After heavy losses, the rebels finally succeeded in destroying the cloning facilities and overwhelming the Imperial fleet in orbit. Temira City was severely damaged and sank into the sea shortly after the battle ended. At this early stage of the Galactic Civil War, the Rebel Alliance lacked the resources to defend an entire planet against the Empire, and soon after they abandoned Kamino to retreat to their hidden base on Dantooine. With the Empire no longer defending the planet, a group of pirates settled on Kamino shortly after the rebel retreat. However, knowing that the Empire would return, they soon moved on to establish a base on another planet that better suited their purposes. The Empire continued producing relatively small numbers of clone troopers on Kamino, until its eventual downfall following the major defeat at the hands of the Rebel Alliance at the Battle of Endor and the destruction of the second Death Star, only 2 years after the first had been destroyed at the Battle of Yavin. The collapse of the Imperial hierarchy and the chaos that followed meant hard times for Kamino. Imperial factions retreated deep into their core territories to consolidate their forces, withdrawing troops early from remote worlds such as Kamino. Although individual factions still occasionally ordered clones from the planet, the loss of the Empire, the largest client in Kamino's history, dealt a severe blow to its economy, which for decades had been almost entirely dependent on the production of clone soldiers. After the Clone Wars and the reign of the Empire, the majority of the galaxy rejected cloning as a matter of principle. With declining orders from the Imperial remnant factions, Kamino turned back to the production of clone labor, even though the demand of companies for clone workers had also plummeted. In line with their culture, Kamino did not join the New Republic founded by the rebels after the fall of the Empire. The Kaminoans built up good relations with the New Republic, but years after the withdrawal of the Imperial troops, they turned their focus inwards again. After decades of subjugation at the hands of off-worlders, the isolationist Kaminoans once again turned their attention to their own struggle for survival above the stormy seas of their home world.